The fork slipped from my hand and hit the edge of the plate with a dull tap. I felt the vibration run up my fingers before I even looked up. My daughter's voice had cut through the room with a sharpness that didn't match the quiet dinner we were supposed to be having. "Dad, stop acting rich." She said it like a correction, not a joke. The sentence hung in the air with a weight that told me it wasn't a slip. It was something she'd been waiting to say. I kept my gaze steady, but inside, something tightened. Her tone wasn't playful or worried. It carried irritation, like she was scolding a child who'd spent money carelessly. She didn't look at me after she said it. She looked at her husband, almost as if checking whether he approved of the moment. That glance told me more than the comment itself. Words can be careless. Glances rarely are. He sat across from me, pushing food around his plate without meeting my eyes. His shoulders were stiff, and there was a tension in his jaw he tried to hide with a slow chew. I watched him for a second, noting the way he seemed to brace himself rather than relax. If my daughter's words had come from worry, he would have supported her openly. Instead, he looked like a man who hoped the discussion wouldn't drift in his direction. I didn't respond. I wanted to hear what silence would draw out of them. My daughter shifted in her chair, tapping her fingers against her napkin. Her voice softened for a moment, as though realizing the sentence had landed harder than she expected. But she didn't take it back. She didn't even adjust it. She just started talking about dinner again, as if nothing had happened. But she avoided my eyes. That avoidance carried the truth she wouldn't say aloud. The room felt different after that. The lights over the dining table seemed dimmer, or maybe the shadows simply grew longer around the things we weren't addressing. I watched the way she sat a little straighter now, as though she had stepped into a new role she had been preparing for. Something rehearsed lived behind her posture, an authority she didn't have before tonight. I had lived long enough to know when someone had practiced a line before delivering it. Her sentence had that sound. Her husband cleared his throat, but whatever he meant to say faded before it reached his mouth. He wiped his hands on his napkin, glanced at the doorway, then back at his plate. Nervous people look for exits, even when they're sitting down. The unease in him didn't match the setting. Nothing dangerous was happening on the surface. Yet he acted like the air carried something he didn't want to breathe. I reached for my glass, not because I needed a drink, but because I needed one steady movement to anchor the moment. The glass felt cool, grounding. When I lifted it, I could feel both of them watching, each for a different reason. My daughter watched with expectation, as though waiting for me to react in a way that confirmed something she already believed. Her husband watched with caution, like someone worried the conversation would veer into territory he wasn't ready to defend. A line had been crossed, not loudly, not dramatically. Quiet lines are the ones that cut the deepest, because they're meant to go unnoticed until they've already changed something. My daughter had spoken to me not as a daughter speaks to a father, but as someone who considered me a weight she was now responsible for managing. That shift wasn't imagined. It was deliberate. We finished the meal with small conversations that meant nothing. Every sentence felt thin, as though stretched over a silence none of us wanted to acknowledge. When they left that night, the house didn't return to calm. The tension remained in the corners, sitting with me at the table long after their footsteps faded down the walkway. I stayed there quietly, replaying her words in the dim room, understanding that nothing spoken so sharply comes without a reason. After they left that night, I sat alone at the table long enough for the dishes to lose their warmth. The quiet nudged old memories forward, ones I hadn't touched in years. When my wife died, our daughter was still young enough to sit on the couch beside me with her head on my shoulder, asking questions no child should have to ask. I carried her through those years the best I could. I cooked what I knew, kept routines steady, and tried to make the house feel full even when it echoed. We learned how to move through grief together, and our bond grew strong because there was no one else to lean on but each other. As she got older, that closeness stayed, at least for a while. She would still call me after work, still share small victories, still ask if I needed anything. I didn't. But the fact that she asked meant something. Then she met the man who would become her husband, and slowly, the rhythm between us shifted. It wasn't the distance most parents feel when their children marry. It was something more directed, a change in the way she looked at me, as if measuring decisions not through our past, but through someone else's opinion. Her husband was polite at first, almost overly so, always offering help I hadn't asked for. As time went on, the help turned into suggestions. Suggestions became advice. Advice became guidance. And the guidance was always about the same thing: how to manage an aging father. I remember the first time he said it out loud. We were sitting in the living room, and he told her she needed to establish structure before things become difficult. He didn't look at me when he said it. He looked at her, delivering the line like something he'd rehearsed. Not long after that, she began pushing for joint accounts. She framed it as convenience, a way to simplify things so bills wouldn't slip through the cracks. I told her I'd been handling my own finances for decades without trouble. She responded with a soft, practiced smile and said, "Dad, you don't need to carry everything alone." It sounded caring on the surface, but the tone underneath was something different, like she had already decided I couldn't keep up. Anytime I asked a question, she brushed it aside as overthinking. If I hesitated before signing something, she called me cautious in a way that wasn't a compliment. She treated me as if I might break without warning. The more she tried to take over, the more I felt pushed to the edges of my own life. I couldn't pinpoint the moment I stopped being her father and became a man she believed needed direction. But the shift didn't come from me. The first true doubt came on an afternoon that should have been peaceful. We were sitting in the backyard, and she was looking around the property with a thoughtful expression. Then she asked, without hesitation, "Dad, who gets the house when, the time comes?" She said it lightly, as though talking about the weather. There was no softness in the question, no emotion tied to memories in these walls. She didn't ask out of fear of losing me. She asked out of interest in what would follow after I was gone. I didn't answer right away. I watched her face as she waited, and for the first time, I saw curiosity where concern used to be. Her eyes weren't on me. They were on the house, the land, the future she was calculating. It settled in slowly, the understanding that her focus had shifted from care to inheritance, from protection to possession. I didn't want to believe it then, but the feeling stayed with me long after that day ended. Sitting in the dimly lit dining room now, her comment from tonight echoed differently, not as a single moment, but as part of a pattern I had tried too long to ignore. The weeks after that dinner brought a change I couldn't ignore. My daughter started visiting more often, but her timing always matched the arrival of my bills. She never came to sit and talk the way she used to. She came with a purpose, asking where I kept the latest statements or whether I'd accidentally missed something online. Her questions were polite, but they circled the same point: my ability to manage the daily parts of my life. Each visit felt like she was searching for proof that I needed help, even though nothing in my routines had changed. Her husband became a different presence altogether. When he visited, he didn't settle in the living room or make conversation. Instead, he drifted through the house with a quiet focus, opening cabinets, checking drawers, looking behind doors as if inspecting the place for a buyer. He didn't touch anything for long, just enough to see what was inside. When I asked if he was looking for something, he smiled without answering and moved to the next room. It wasn't curiosity, it was assessment. One afternoon, my daughter asked for my online banking passwords. She phrased it as a backup plan, just in case I ever needed her to help quickly. I told her I'd manage, and she pressed again, smiling like she was offering a gift instead of asking for control. When I didn't give in, she shifted her tone to concern, saying she worried I might forget them one day. The word forget lingered longer than it should have. She said it too easily, as if she'd practiced saying it. I stayed quiet and let the moment pass, but inside, something sharp settled into place. It was the way she expected compliance, not the request itself. She wasn't testing my memory. She was testing my boundaries. The first real clue came when she stood up from the couch to get her purse. A paper slipped out of the open zipper and landed on the floor beside her. I bent to pick it up before she could. It was a printed property valuation report. Recent, detailed, not something someone prints just because. I handed it to her, watching her face carefully. She grabbed it too quickly, forcing a laugh that didn't match the look in her eyes. She said she was just curious what homes were selling for in the area. Too curious, apparently, to mention it before now. She tucked the paper deep into her purse and changed the subject with unusual speed. Her husband, who had been standing near the hallway doorway, suddenly looked very still, as though waiting to see whether I believed her explanation. Neither of them said anything else about it, and the silence wasn't accidental. It was the silence of two people who had been planning something together. Later that evening, he sat across from me with a calm expression that felt too practiced. He spoke slowly, asking questions with long pauses between them. How I'd been sleeping, whether I ever forgot appointments, if I felt overwhelmed managing the house. His tone was light, but the gaps between his words felt intentional, as though he was observing how I processed each one. He wasn't making conversation, he was evaluating. When he finished, he stood and patted my shoulder in a way that didn't suit him, then walked out of the room without waiting for any answer. My daughter followed him moments later, her eyes glancing toward me, then toward her purse, as if checking whether anything had slipped again. I sat there in the quiet, watching the spot where they had stood. Their movements, their questions, their timing, it all lined up too neatly. Nothing was loud or direct, but the coordination between them was unmistakable. They weren't acting separately. They were acting in sync. And though nothing explosive had happened, the edges of something larger were beginning to show through the quiet places in my home. The next morning, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop open, the house still quiet from the night before. I typed in my banking password and waited for the page to load, feeling a tightening in my chest that had nothing to do with age. When the account finally came up, I went through the activity line by line. A few entries looked normal. Then I saw it, multiple login attempts from times I knew I'd been asleep or out of the house. They weren't large enough to trigger alerts, but they were there, sitting between the routine ones like footsteps in dust. Someone had tried to enter more than once, and whoever it was had stopped right before drawing attention. I clicked through the security tab and saw another detail I'd never enabled. Device recognized. The location didn't match anything I owned. I closed the laptop slowly, letting the reality settle. They weren't waiting for me to give them access. They were already looking for ways to take it. And now, I had proof someone was testing boundaries before crossing them. I decided to check something else while the house stayed silent. I called my insurance company, letting the automated system lead me through its usual steps. When I finally reached a representative, she pulled up my file and mentioned that my daughter had already spoken to them about updating my records. She said it casually, as if it were routine. My grip tightened on the phone. I asked what updates she requested. The representative hesitated, her voice careful, saying only that my daughter had asked about future adjustments and whether my coverage allowed family management. It wasn't illegal, but it wasn't innocent either. After the call, I walked to the spare bedroom, once my daughter's room, now used for storage. She sometimes used her old laptop there when she visited, saying it was easier than carrying her new one around. I didn't have to look long. The device sat on the desk, lid half closed, still plugged in. I lifted it, the plastic warm from earlier use. When I opened the screen, it lit up without asking for a password. Files appeared across the desktop, and one folder caught my eye. Planning. Inside was a draft document titled Asset Consolidation Strategy. The words were clean, typed in bold at the top. As I scrolled, I saw a list of my accounts, property details, and notes about liquidation potential. But what stopped me were the side comments, short typed observations describing me as dependent, easily persuaded, and mentally inconsistent during long conversations. None of those things were true. They weren't even approximations of truth. They were the foundation of a narrative someone wanted to present. I closed the laptop carefully and returned it to the exact position I found it. The room felt colder as I left, like the air was distancing itself from what I now knew. Later that afternoon, my son-in-law stopped by. He moved around the kitchen like he had somewhere to be, but didn't want to leave yet. He mentioned paperwork again, dropping the comment into the conversation with the same casual tone people use when talking about the weather. "We'll need your signatures soon," he said, wiping his hands on a dish towel that wasn't his. He didn't specify what documents he meant. He didn't have to. When my daughter came by later, I asked her a simple question about the bills she said she was helping organize. The moment the words left my mouth, she broke eye contact and moved around the room, touching objects that didn't need touching. She didn't answer the question. She gave me a string of vague comments meant to soothe without explaining anything. Her avoidance wasn't subtle. It was deliberate. I leaned back in my chair, watching her move. Each shift, each pause, each careful smile pointed towards something larger than concern. The truth wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It lived in the quiet places they thought I wouldn't look. And now those quiet places were beginning to speak. I heard the knock just after sunset, a slow, uneven rhythm against the front door. When I opened it, my son-in-law stood on the porch with the kind of sway a man gets when he's had enough to feel bold, but not enough to fall. His breath carried the sharp smell of liquor, and his smile came too quickly, wider than the moment deserved. He walked past me without waiting to be invited, heading straight for the living room, like he owned the place. I closed the door behind him and watched the way he dropped into the armchair, loose and careless. He leaned back, laughing under his breath at nothing in particular. "Things are moving faster than expected," he said, waving his hand as if the air needed to hear it too. The sentence didn't fit anything happening in the room. It belonged somewhere else, some conversation he hadn't meant to carry into my house. I didn't respond. I let the silence settle, knowing silence does more work than questions when a drunk man wants to brag. He started talking about progress, about timelines, about how it all lines up now. His words spilled together, each one exposing a piece he shouldn't have shared. Then he mentioned my daughter's preparation phase, a phrase too professional for ordinary family talk. I asked quietly what she was preparing. He grinned, lowering his voice as if telling me a secret. "The house," he said. "She's been getting everything ready." A cold weight pressed against my chest. I kept my face steady and asked what he meant by ready. He laughed again, louder this time, rubbing his forehead. "She already talked to someone, a buyer. They're interested. Documents are almost ready." His eyes drifted to the hallway, unfocused but confident, like he was repeating something he'd heard enough times to believe it. My house, my home, had become a line in someone else's plan. He didn't notice my stillness. He was too wrapped in the thrill of speaking freely. He said my daughter had been telling people I was declining fast, that I was having trouble keeping up. He chuckled like it was an exaggeration she used to justify the next steps. He didn't see the way those words hit me. He didn't see anything at all. He was busy enjoying the sound of his own voice. I asked who she told. He shrugged, staring at the ceiling. "Friends, maybe even the realtor. Hell, I don't know. She wants them to believe she's helping you before things get complicated." His tone dipped at the last word, as though he'd brushed against a boundary even liquor shouldn't cross. He sat forward, elbows on his knees, blinking hard like the room had shifted. Then he said the line that changed everything. "She thinks he won't fight back." He didn't realize he'd spoken in the third person. He didn't realize he was talking about me as if I weren't sitting 10 feet away. He rubbed his temple and repeated it softer, almost muttering. "She thinks he won't fight back." The certainty in his voice wasn't confidence. It was something learned, something he'd been told enough times to believe. He stood up abruptly, mumbling something about needing air, and staggered toward the front door. He didn't wait for me to follow. He didn't even say goodbye. He stepped outside and disappeared into the night, leaving the door half open behind him. I closed it slowly, feeling the weight of the house pressing in around me. His words stayed in the air long after he left. Not guesses, not misunderstandings. Proof. Solid, careless proof. They weren't planning to help me. They weren't planning to wait. They had already built the path. They had already chosen the future. And now I knew exactly how far they intended to go. The next morning, I drove to the estate lawyer I hadn't seen in years. His office was on the second floor of an old brick building, the kind with creaking steps and long hallways that carried every sound. When I walked in, he stood from behind his desk with a slow nod, studying my face before offering his hand. He didn't ask how I'd been. He simply gestured for me to sit, the way someone does when they already sense the visit isn't routine. I placed the folder of documents on the desk between us, letting the weight of it speak first. He opened each page carefully, reading without interruption, his eyes moving back and forth with the steady focus of a man who'd done this work long enough to recognize patterns quickly. When he reached the printed valuation report, he let out a quiet breath. When he reached the notes describing me as dependent and mentally inconsistent, he leaned back in his chair and folded his arms. "This," he said, tapping the papers lightly, "is a textbook control attempt." His voice didn't carry shock. It carried certainty. I asked him to explain. He did so the way professionals do, calm, direct, and without embellishment. He said children rarely take over a parent's life in one step. It happens in small strategic moves, questioning their ability, managing their schedules, altering financial access, and framing them as forgetful. He pointed out how the login attempts fit the pattern, how the property research matched the next stage, how the fabricated medical language showed intention, not confusion. He didn't dramatize any of it. He didn't need to. The facts were already heavy enough. He continued, saying that once enough small notes are collected, someone might petition to take legal authority over an elder for their safety. He said those cases move quickly when the groundwork looks convincing, when family presents themselves as the responsible ones and paints the parent as vulnerable. Your daughter is preparing the foundation, he said. She's building a case before bringing it forward. His tone was level, but each word settled like a stone in the room. I asked what could happen next. He explained the steps as calmly as if reviewing a contract. She could attempt to claim medical decision rights. She could argue I wasn't managing finances responsibly. She could request oversight of my property. She could even frame the sale of the house as an act of protection. None of his explanations were exaggerated. They were quiet, procedural possibilities, each more revealing than the last. He leaned forward again, hands on the desk, and told me something I hadn't expected. She isn't acting alone. The language in these notes comes from someone guiding her. I thought of her husband's drunken slip, the lines he repeated as if memorized. The puzzle no longer felt scattered. It was arranged clearly now, each piece aligned. The lawyer said people often get bold when they believe the parent won't resist. They think age means surrender, he added, not unkindly. It doesn't. He advised me to secure every important document immediately. Deeds, insurance, bank statements, identification. He said to keep originals somewhere they couldn't reach, and to give him copies in case anything went missing. He recommended updating my legal protections before they attempted anything formal. Each instruction came with a quiet urgency, not fear, just truth. The kind of truth a man gives when he knows the window to act is still open but closing. When I stood to leave, he handed me a small list he'd written during our conversation. Simple steps, each one necessary. I folded it and placed it in my pocket. He walked me to the door and paused before opening it. "You're doing the right thing by coming now," he said. "You still have time." Outside, the sunlight felt sharper than usual, not warm but clarifying. I walked toward my car with the steady realization that the danger wasn't imagined, exaggerated, or misunderstood. It was real, and it had a direction. When I got home from the lawyer's office, I went straight to the study without turning on the hallway lights. The room felt safer in its dimness, quieter, easier to think in. I opened the file drawers one by one and pulled out every document that mattered. Property deeds, old bank statements, insurance policies, medical records. I laid them across the desk in neat rows, checking each date, each signature, each detail that could be twisted if someone wanted to argue I wasn't capable. These papers had lived in my home for decades. Now they were the only thing standing between me and the story someone else was trying to write. When everything was sorted, I placed the originals into a sealed envelope and locked them inside a metal box I'd kept untouched since my working years. Then I carried the box to the garage and tucked it behind a set of tools I knew neither of them would bother with. It wasn't perfect security, but it was enough for now. The copies I kept in a separate folder, ready for the lawyer if he needed to move quickly. I had never imagined I'd need to prepare my own life like a case file. But clarity has a way of sharpening a man, even at my age. I returned to the kitchen table and called the lawyer, telling him the documents were sorted and that I was ready to follow whatever next step he recommended. His tone was calm, the same steady one he'd used earlier, and he said he would hold the copies and prepare filings if anything suspicious happened. "You have authority on your side now," he told me. "Don't let them sense you're ahead of them." I understood what he meant. Showing strength too soon would only push them to act faster. I needed them to believe I was still the man they thought they could steer. By late afternoon, my daughter started calling. 3 missed calls in an hour, each message more impatient than the last. She said we needed to finalize some urgent paperwork. She didn't specify what paperwork. She didn't even pretend it was casual. Her voice carried the same tone she used when she thought I'd forgotten something. Tight, clipped, rehearsed. I let the calls go to voicemail, letting her impatience grow. People reveal more when they think you're slipping. My son-in-law followed soon after with his own calls. His tone was lighter, trying to sound friendly, but the questions gave him away. He wanted to know where I was, what time I planned to be home, whether I'd eaten. He repeated himself too often, like a man trying to check where someone stands before stepping into the room. He was nervous, but not about me. He was nervous about timing. I picked up on the fourth call and let my voice drift a little, slower than usual, letting him think I was confused about schedules. I apologized for mixed-up days and said I wasn't sure what paperwork he meant. He softened instantly, telling me he and my daughter would guide me through it. His confidence returned the moment he thought I was uncertain. He believed the role he wanted me to play. That was useful. After the call, I sat at the edge of the bed, letting the quiet settle around me. Every step so far felt like walking through a hallway lined with doors, some open, some closed, some I didn't know existed until recently. But the direction was clear now. They were preparing a moment to press control into my hands, disguised as care, and when that moment came, they expected me to sign, comply, and step aside. I wasn't going to give them that moment. Not until everything was in place. Not until the truth had a stage of its own. The confrontation would come soon, but it would come on my terms, and only after every piece of evidence sat exactly where it needed to be. They arrived just after dinner, the timing too precise to be coincidence. My daughter walked in first, holding a thick envelope against her chest, like it was something fragile. Her husband followed, carrying a slim folder and wearing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. They didn't ask how I was. They didn't sit down. They stood in the doorway of the living room with the kind of confidence people get when they believe every piece is already in place. My daughter said they had important documents to sign tonight, her tone firm but wrapped in the softness she used when pretending she was doing me a favor. I motioned for them to sit, and they did, side by side on the couch, close enough to appear united. She opened the envelope and spread the papers across the coffee table. The titles were familiar: financial authorizations, property oversight forms, medical cooperation agreements. Each document was framed as support, help, protection. Every line was written to shift control without saying the word. My son-in-law leaned forward, pointing at signature lines and offering explanations before I asked. They weren't offering options. They were directing the outcome. I listened quietly, letting their words stack on top of each other. Their sentences were too polished, their transitions too smooth. Concern disguised as certainty, certainty disguised as care. I waited until my daughter finished her practiced explanation, then asked a simple question about the financial section. Her answer contradicted what she'd told me last month. I asked another about the medical clause. This time, her husband answered, but his explanation didn't match what she'd just said. I kept asking, calm, steady, pointed. With each question, the cracks widened. Their rehearsed lines slipped. Their rhythms faltered. My daughter tried to regain control, placing her hand on mine and telling me it was all for peace of mind. Her voice trembled, just a little. Her husband told me I was overthinking, that they were only trying to avoid confusion later. The words were light, but the pressure behind them was sharp. They thought they were close. They thought signing those papers would be the final step. I leaned back and told them I had someone joining us. My daughter's face stiffened. My son-in-law shifted in his seat, eyes darting toward the hallway. Before either of them could speak, the front door opened, and the lawyer stepped inside with a quiet nod. He carried a folder, thicker than theirs, and moved with the calm confidence of a man who didn't need to raise his voice to be heard. He greeted them politely, then took a seat across from them. He placed his folder on the table and opened it slowly. The first pages he laid out were printed emails. Messages between the two of them discussing timeline management and narrative preparation. Then came the valuation reports, the insurance inquiries, the draft notes describing me as declining, inconsistent, and dependent. Each document was placed with deliberate care, forming a row of evidence too detailed to explain away. My daughter's composure cracked first. Her breath caught, and she reached for one of the pages, then pulled her hand back without touching it. My son-in-law didn't speak at all. He stared at the papers, his face draining of confidence, his earlier certainty collapsing into a hollow stillness. The lawyer explained nothing dramatic, just factual statements, each one grounding the reality of their actions. The room felt colder with every page laid out. My daughter's shoulders slumped. Her husband swallowed hard, unable to look at me. The truth wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It sat between us in black ink and careful words, undeniable in its simplicity. Their plan wasn't suspected. It wasn't imagined. It was documented, completely. And they finally understood that every step they took had been seen. The lawyer moved quickly after they left. The next morning, he filed the paperwork to place legal protection around my estate. Nothing extreme, just enough to make sure no financial moves could be made without my direct consent. It was a protective shell, not a takeover, and he explained each step in clear, steady language. I signed the necessary forms in his office, the pen moving without hesitation. For the first time in weeks, I felt like the ground under my feet was solid again. By the afternoon, the police had already begun their inquiry. They called to schedule a brief visit, saying they wanted to review the documents the lawyer submitted. When the officers arrived, they were calm and professional, asking straightforward questions. I handed them the folder containing the emails, printed valuation reports, and the notes describing me as dependent and mentally inconsistent. They read each page with the same focused attention the lawyer had shown. There was no drama in their reactions, only a quiet acknowledgement that the pattern fit what they often saw in elder exploitation cases. They asked to speak with my daughter. They said it gently, as if aware of the weight the request carried. She met with them later that day, and though I wasn't present, the officer called afterward to tell me she had answered questions but struggled to explain the inconsistencies in her statements. My son-in-law was questioned separately. The officer didn't share details, only said his answers did not align with hers. That was all I needed to hear. Their unity had broken the moment truth entered a room they didn't control. Over the next 2 days, word spread quietly through the family. A few relatives called with shock in their voices, unable to understand how it had reached this point. Others tried to stay neutral, their discomfort leaking through pauses and half-finished sentences. No one defended what my daughter and her husband had done, but no one wanted to stand too close to it either. I didn't blame them. Truth affects families like cold wind. It makes everyone pull their coats tighter. I spent one morning changing the locks on the house. The locksmith didn't ask questions. He worked quickly and handed me a new set of keys with a nod. After he left, I walked through each room, checking windows, drawers, and doors, not out of fear, but to take back ownership of the space. I updated passwords, closed access points I never should have opened, and moved the secured documents to a safer location. Everything felt quieter once the house was no longer an open door. The next step was updating legal papers. At the lawyer's office, I signed new directives stating clearly that no family member could make decisions on my behalf without explicit written authorization. The lawyer read each line aloud, confirming I understood every clause. I appreciated the formality. It honored something my daughter and her husband had ignored: my capability, my judgment, my right to remain in control of my own life. When I returned home that evening, the house felt different, not empty, just honest. I sat at the kitchen table and let the day settle. The weight of betrayal was there, but it didn't crush me. It sat beside me like something that belonged in the story, not something that defined it. I didn't blame myself for trusting my own child. Trust is a natural instinct, not a mistake. Their actions were theirs alone. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel anger. I felt clarity, cold, steady, unshakable. The threat had been real, and I had faced it without bending. The danger had been close, but it never crossed the final boundary. And now, for the first time in a long while, the house felt truly mine again. The house was quiet again, the kind of quiet that settles only after a storm has passed. I sat in the armchair near the window, the new locks glinting faintly on the front door across the room. The air felt steady, familiar, untouched by the footsteps and voices that had filled the place with tension for months. I rested my hands on the armrests and let the stillness spread, not as loneliness, but as proof that the danger had finally stepped back. It was the first evening in a long time where every corner of the house felt like mine again. I thought about how trust doesn't disappear in a single moment. It wears down in small places, quiet questions, careful steps, small liberties people take when they think you won't notice. My daughter hadn't changed all at once. Her voice had shifted first, then her questions, then the way she watched me when she thought I wasn't looking. Those pieces stacked slowly, too slowly for a father to accept, until they formed something sharper than concern. Sitting here now, I could see the path clearly. The signs were always there. They just hurt too much to name at the time. What surprised me most wasn't the plan they built. It was how easily they covered it in the language of care. Safety, simplicity, future planning. Words that sound gentle when spoken, but hide something colder underneath. Entitlement never announces itself. It arrives dressed as help, patient and polite, waiting for the moment you hesitate long enough for someone else to step forward and claim the space you left open. I understood now how quiet shifts in motive can reshape a family without anyone raising their voice. As I sat there, I thought about the elders who don't catch the signs, who trust too quickly, or who feel guilty for questioning their own children. I wished more of them knew what I had learned the hard way. I wished they knew how important it is to keep every document where only they can reach it, to track every change, to ask every question without shame. People say age makes you fragile. That isn't true. It only makes your silence more convenient for others. I realized that in fighting for my home, I had defended more than the walls around me. I had defended my place in my own life, my say, my judgment, my right to decide what happens to me. Property can be replaced. Money can be earned again or left behind without regret. But self-respect is something a man builds over years, piece by piece, day by day. Losing that would have cost more than anything they tried to take. Keeping it was the real victory, quiet and steady, sitting here in the calm of my own living room. The evening light faded across the floor, softening the edges of the furniture. I didn't feel angry, and I didn't feel relieved. What I felt was understanding, clean and simple. Love doesn't disappear just because someone crosses a line, but it changes shape. You can still care for someone while refusing to hand them the parts of your life they haven't earned. Boundaries aren't walls. They're reminders of where dignity lives. I leaned back and let the room settle around me. I wasn't afraid of growing older. Age wasn't the enemy. Age was honest. It showed me who people became when they thought I couldn't push back. It taught me that protection is not paranoia. It's responsibility. If there was one truth worth passing on, it was this. Growing old doesn't make you weak. Trusting without caution does. And a man who knows where to draw his line stays standing, no matter who tries to cross them.